All right. Hopefully everyone can see me, hear me, all that good stuff. Happy Thursday as I'm recording this. I believe this will be the final part in our, I guess, four-part, ultimately, look at Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This may be the part that I'm probably looking forward to the most, just in terms of the stuff that I think is interesting. I always want to see, read, think about the kind of GM, if referee facing mechanics and guidance that a particular system will have. Oftentimes you can see it gives you some idea of kind of maybe why the rules are the way they are, of course, maybe how they imagine you using the rules, all that kind of good stuff. I don't think I have anything else, so let's not waste any time with me. Hey Gasher and hey Brian Smith. Let's just get to it. So let me switch over. Bam. Here we are. And I will comment again. I really wish they would have bookmarked, linked up their PDF. Just makes and I don't know if Acrobat is just bad at this or not. You would think Acrobat would be really good at a lot of this PDF stuff since it's an Adobe product and PDFs are kind of Adobe's thing, but it doesn't remember where you left off, or at least maybe the way I'm opening and closing these documents, it doesn't. And then not being able to just easily click on a table of contents and move somewhere, I have to scroll around. It makes it more of a pain. And especially for a book that I hope you're considering is you're going to be your sort of your tome, your guide, something you're going to look at over and over again. This is the core rule book. Having linked up table of contents and preferably even a linked up index would be so helpful. So Paizo, it's not brand new. Pathfinder 2nd Edition came out at least a few years ago. This is not like it just came out yesterday. Please, when you come up with your next version of this book, your next iteration, you go through and put in your next rule fixes, whatever, please think about spending a little extra time and effort to put those interior links and bookmarks in the book. I know in things like InDesign and other apps, they do kind of do a lot of it automatically for you once you set things up. So it's not like some poor person has to go in there by hand and do it. But even if they did, it's worth doing because that it adds a whole other level of usability when I can do that. Hey, Slurring Scott, welcome. Unfortunately, Michael Anderson, who's been our Sherpa, thanks so much, Michael Anderson, through most of this, telling me kind of if I'm on the right track in my interpretations or what I should look at. Not here today. So we're going to be muddling through in his absence. If there's another Pathfinder expert that wants to lend their expertise to this expedition, feel free to step on up. Otherwise, it's just going to be me hopefully getting the right gist of everything. I think I've done pretty well so far, given the scope of everything. But I'm always happy to follow in the footsteps of someone who is native to this particular plane. This is Chapter 10, Game Mastering. As Game Master, you run each session of Pathfinder, providing the link between the players and the world of the game. It's up to you to set the scene as the player characters battle monsters, interact with other people, and explore the world. All right, ba-bam. Smith said he's left me to climb the summit and enjoy the view. Yeah, that's something that Tenzing Norgay didn't do that for Sir Edmund Hillary, right? Said, you'll get to Everest is right there. Go ahead and finish that part yourself. I'll wait here. But yes, like what was it, like Moses, right? He's pointed us towards the promised land, but could not join us in actually coming along. Just didn't take us, 40 years of wandering through the deserts to get here. All right. Again, as with the other sections, I'm not going to exhaustively read every single paragraph, but I think these bullet points at the top are key. Want to know what they mean, so I'm going to read them, and then we'll go on from there. And also, I have my window open today because it's a beautiful day, so apologies in advance if some of the extra little noises from outside. Like right now, there's a kid on a scooter out there that I can hear. You probably can't hear it, but if you get some of that noise, it's just me trying to enjoy a little fresh air for once this summer. When you take on the role of Game Master, you'll have the rewarding job of crafting fun experiences for a group of your friends. Your responsibilities include telling the story of the group's adventures in a compelling and consistent way, fleshing out the world in which the game takes place, emphasizing the fantastical while grounding it enough in the real world to feel believable, entertaining the players and yourself with novel concepts, and rewarding creative ideas with interesting outcomes. Preparing for game sessions by building or studying adventures and creating characters and plots. Improvising the reactions of non-player characters and other forces in the world as the players do unexpected things. And finally, making rules decisions to ensure fairness and keep the game moving forward. So I guess the big thing to say is, wow, that's a big list. Now I know that this stuff, it's not like they're not telling the truth about this stuff. I veer sometimes on wanting to make sure that a lot of some of these at least are put irresponsibly put on the group as a whole and not totally on the shoulders of the GM, such as kind of entertaining, right? Everybody should be entertaining everybody else. That should really be the kind of the main goal and part of the fun having in the game. We're entertaining everybody. It's not the players as the audience and the GM, the referee, as like a stand-up comic on stage with a microphone. And here I am to entertain you. No, the game is entertaining if you do it the right way. You hope, and then everyone's entertaining each other. Right? So that's one I try to place more on the group. Telling the story of the group's adventures in a compelling and consistent way. I mean, that's kind of interesting, right? Because it doesn't presume that you are creating the story; you're telling it. And the idea that it has to be it's both compelling and consistent is interesting. I think that yes, we want the world to be consistent and make sense. But again, the other parts of that in terms of the players' adventures, the group's adventures and how compelling they are, I think that's kind of a group thing. If, hey, as a player, you want to have compelling adventures, then don't just do goofy stuff. Like, it's not my role as the GM or the referee to take you who've determined that all you're going to do in the next 5 sessions is dance around this public square while the village burns around you, and I'm dangling all these plot hooks in front of you, and you are determinedly not taking them. It's not my job to somehow make that compelling. That's everybody's job. And for you to look as a player and say, well, this might be fun for me. I don't know why, but it is. But it's not entertaining for everybody. And it's certainly, this is not a compelling. When I sit back a month from now or a year from now and I want to tell the story of my fun times I had in this game, is this going to add to that story? No. At best, it's going to be just kind of a goofy side story. So, let me help in making it compelling. But it is interesting that we could see kind of what they're envisioning the GM's rules are. I do wonder, though, you're a new GM, you got Pathfinder 2nd edition, maybe it's your first game you're given to, you saw it at a gaming shop or a bookstore or something, you picked it up and you're like, I want to play this with my friends and I think I want to be the GM. I don't know if the reading this is going to make you want to keep GMing. I could easily see someone reading that and going like, oh my gosh, this is too much work. Someone else needs to GM. And I know that GMing comes across that way anyway, but I almost wonder if, given that this is a core rule book, given that new folks are going to get it, that maybe make it feel a little bit more fun, or maybe lean into the fun stuff, or maybe kind of go through the stuff, parse it out a little bit. I mean, they're not wrong in giving you a sense up front, but boy, if you're a new GM or a prospective GM reading that, I think it can feel like you're stepping into something that's extremely, extremely daunting. Hey, Phil, welcome. Rallying some likes for my effort. Oh, I appreciate that, Phil. Thanks so much. Brian Smith drinking from the fire hose. Yeah, it could feel that way. But we're going to get some tools. This chapter aims to give us the tools we need to theoretically live up to all those bullet points. All right. So how much of this do I want to read? Well, the one thing I will read here is there's a sidebar called collaboration during play, which I think is an important one. So at least I'll start reading it and we'll see if it is worth reading as we go along. As game master, you have the final say on how the world and rules function and how non-player characters act. This rule's purpose is to make the game run smoothly, with one guiding hand ensuring consistency. It's not intended to make one player into a dictator over the rest of the group. Collaboration is vital to role-playing games. How you implement collaboration in a game depends on what your players are interested in. In some groups, players enjoy adding details to the world and to non-player characters. In others, players want to feel like the world is outside their control, and the only decisions they get to make are those made by their own characters. Both are fun and acceptable ways to play. You are encouraged to collect input from your players before you start, asking what storytelling genres they'd like to emphasize, which areas of the world they want to play in, the types of enemies they'd like to face, or which published adventure they want to play. A good campaign includes some back and forth at the beginning as the players figure out what characters they want to play and you figure out what sort of adventure to run. The results can range from building an adventure entirely to fit the characters to choosing a specific published adventure, having the players make their characters, and then just adapting the beginning of that adventure so that all the player characters have a reason to be involved. As you play, opportunities to collaborate will occur again and again. When players throw out suggestions or come up with specific theories about the events of the campaign, they're telling you what they'd like to see in the game. Try to find ways to incorporate their suggestions with enough of a twist that each still includes something unexpected. This is basically your have a rolling session 0 sort of thing. And here's some more. This is hibiscus iced tea for the working man. Oh, Phil Kearney with who is that? What was that? Was that drinking from a fountain that was more like an avalanche coming down the mountain? Oh, I'm forgetting which band that was. But yes, good song reference there, Phil. So here they're talking about rolling session zeros. I kind of wish they would just say have a session 0. A couple of things here. So the first section they have, this is a side text, and the first thing is planning a campaign. And I really wish this is not their fault. I'm not dinging the book because they don't have this, but I think that in terms of how to make a GM's life, especially a new GM's life, easier, is to say, look, pitch your campaign. And I would say this: if you're a new GM, you happen to be listening, watching this for some reason, I don't feel like, especially these kinds of read-throughs are the things that new GMs are coming to look at. But if you're a new GM and you happen to be watching or listening to this somehow, some way, don't plan your campaign first. Here's what you do first: pitch your campaign. You have an idea. You have this thing you'd like. For example, the my home game, which is currently in some sort of summer hiatus, hopefully reconvening soon, was essentially Dune mixed in with Arthurian stuff, essentially taking kind of factions and politics and that sort of deep thinky, all these conflicts happening beneath the surface with an Arthurian setting. That's kind of was the thing that my players and I collaborated on. And I went to my couple, I only had 2 players at the time, so I went to both of them and said, hey, what kind of game do you want to play? Right? Just kind of, like they're mentioning here, collaboration, and they gave it to me. But that was kind of how we established the pitch. I didn't start doing any planning until after that meeting of the minds. I came to them, let's talk about what kind of game we want to play. I didn't particularly care. I didn't have a strong thing one way or another to do this, that, or the other. If they had pulled up something like I want My Little Pony meets The Walking Dead or something, I might have been, I'm not sure how to do that or if I want to do that. But in this case, it all worked out. I took the results of that pitch and then I went into doing the planning of the campaign, which I could also then hook into, hey, what kind of characters you guys want to play? And we can sort of figure that all out. Pitch your campaign first. Don't go into the planning first, because when you're doing all this planning, that's work. And you're starting putting in work before you know whether your players are going to, whether you have players at all, whether they want to do this, all this stuff. You're just bound to be disappointed if you go through and do some sort of hours of world building and campaign plotting and all this stuff that you're putting into it. And then it turns out, they don't want to do that. Or, this doesn't work for them, or some other thing. You're going to get mad because you're going to feel like you're throwing work away, and you will be throwing work away. And then you just have to end up doing some of it or all of it over again. So pitch your campaign, settle on what it is first. And in my case, like I said, I collaborated, but if you as a new GM, you have this idea, and lots of folks, I see it on Reddit, they've got a great idea for a campaign. Before you take it any further, get your little, an elevator pitch in terms of in screenwriting. They talk about when you're pitching your content you're trying to produce, you come up with an elevator pitch. It's that 30-second to a minute long way you can just, the idea was you'd be in an elevator with somebody and you have this moment to pitch your great idea. What would you tell them? Have that kind of thing written up. Paragraph, that's it. It doesn't have to be, technical. People get very technical on different things. You would read about how short or whatever your elevator pitch could be. Don't worry about that so much, but just think about, I have 5 minutes. I got a paragraph. I got a minute video I'm gonna do on it. What could I say in that minute about my campaign setting? And that's it. Write it up, hand it out to folks, put that on your LFG entry, and then just sit tight. And if you have ideas, write them down, make notes, whatever. But don't do any serious work until you get that interest you build up, and then do the work. It'll just save you a ton of pain and frustration and that kind of anger that I think happens when GMs feel like they're putting in work that's not appreciated. Save yourself the work, pitch first, then plan. So in terms of Pathfinder, getting back to this after this long sidebar of my own, planning a campaign, we get a campaign length can range from a few sessions to many years. 2 main factors determine the campaign length: how much time you need to complete the story and how much time players want to devote to the game. I don't really find that there's I mean, I know people plan things out to some degree, but I feel like there's kind of two ranges of campaign length. And they just say right here, a single session or a one shot. Maybe it ends up being a three, depending on how it works, a couple of sessions. But I really think there's kind of one shot, and then there's campaigns of time of indeterminate times because there's a lot of unknowns there. I don't find that a lot of people, maybe I'm wrong, a lot of people are pre-planning out and saying this is going to be exactly a 10 session. I suppose now with people making campaigns for media and streams and everything, they might do that. But I don't know. It seems pretty interesting. But definitely, one shots versus ongoing kind of campaigns. They have expected durations. Is it going all the way to 20? I don't know. Do people do that either? Hey, Helsent or Helsente. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but welcome. I don't think you missed too much being late. I didn't get very far yet. Let's see what we have. Phil says, I'm preaching the truth. Well, I hope I'm preaching something. Right, Smith says they want to set the number of sessions next time they agree to run, not into the infinite campaign sessions. I'm sure that's a lot of GMs want to. Maybe it's a good thing maybe it is good they put it in here to put a bug in your brain to try to say, hey, it's going to be this many sessions. I just wonder how that. I think if you're going to do that, hey, this is 20 sessions, that's it. Hard, full stop. You're going to have to be flexible. They're probably going to have to do some railroading here and there, or just some ways you're going to have to just turn the party and say, you know what, this has nothing to do with what we're doing. We only got this many sessions left, and by golly, I'm ending it on session 20. I don't care. You just got to do more management to keep things on track. Maybe that's the best way. I'm saying if you have this, that finish line's in 20 sessions, you're going to have to be sure you can keep your hand on the wheel and that your players are okay with that. I don't mind the open-ended part. I think for me, it's whether that exhaustion starts to come in. And, there's probably a whole other video we could talk about where GM exhaustion comes from, what contributes to it, maybe some ways around it. It's probably a multiple videos, and there's probably not even one answer. But, it's hard. But maybe it's good to keep in mind, hey, I've got this thing that's 5 sessions long. I think the other thing is sometimes, especially when you're new, how do you decide how long your thing is? A lot of times you can either end up with way more than really is going to fit. I ended up prepping 40 sessions worth of material and it's only a 20 session run, or I ended up prepping only 5 sessions worth and now I'm scrambling because I don't know what I'm going to do with the other 5 sessions. Brian Smith says they reach session 20 and feel like they didn't finish it. Then that's the tale you imagine about how it could have ended versus the spot you got. That's an interesting way to do it. That almost be like running it like it's a prolonged convention type thing, right? Where you sit down for a 4-hour session and either you get through the whole one shot at the end of that convention session or you don't. And that's basically it. After expected duration, we get the themes. The theme you choose for your campaign are what distinguish it from other campaigns. They include the major dramatic questions of your story and the repeated use of certain environments or creatures. They can also include embracing a genre beyond traditional high fantasy. The theme you choose for your campaign the themes suggest storyline elements you might use. Themes are something I know I've talked about it, I think ages ago. I remember reading from this kind of old, but I think very classic book on plays where this playwright talked about themes and plays. And I made a comparison to that and your campaigns. I don't remember which video it was, so just restate it here, but I think it's something that really gets drastically overlooked. I don't think a lot of GMs plan their campaigns thinking about themes, and themes can be things in the playwriting sense, which I think works fine here. It's kind of like you're asking a question that the campaign answers, right? Does true love conquer all? And as a GM, you might think, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. Where in a play, as the playwright, you would determine, I think it does. And then your play is essentially setting up the situation of asking the question and then answering it in something. I think the example, because I think this came up in his book, he goes back to Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. Does true love conquer all? The answer is yes. And so the play is kind of structured so that these challenges keep sort of piling up. And the question has to keep being asked, will Romeo and Juliet, if this is true love, and I think it is, then can they get over this hump? Okay, they do. Then can they get over this obstacle? And then finally at the end, can it even surpass death? And the answer is, even though it's tragic, yes, their true love does surpass death. And the question is then answered. I don't think that a lot of GMs do that. I think a lot of GMs start with just hey, Orcus is coming back, and I think it's cool, and I want to do it. And then they just pattern their campaign over that, or they hero's journey kind of thing, and they okay, they do it. I think a lot of campaigns would automatically have more depth if instead of starting with something like, well, I want to have them become gods, or I want to tell the story of them trying to stop a guy from becoming a god, or stop something from killing the gods, or I don't know, whatever thing comes up, someone ending the world, or my version of Sauron, whatever is to think about the themes. Think about, well, what is this? If you're going to have, say, a Sauron like character, what is that kind of saying about your role? What does this Sauron character kind of represent thematically? And then that kind of answers the question of if Sauron in your game world is equated to, I don't know, corruption or something, corruption of the spirit, corruption of the body, corruption in ethically, that Sauron wins is essentially you're saying, well, will corruption take over? Can other things prevent it? Then that becomes your thing, and that becomes your theme, and then you can build things around it. And then I think you have a more thoughtful, interesting campaign than if you just had some just random Sauron character. But I don't think it actually happened. So I appreciate them coming up with this. I almost wish it was more pronounced, and I hope folks do that. Maybe I should do a set of things on that, because I think that's the other thing that gets lost when you're looking at converting a lot of things that are literary, cultural things into your role playing game, is that you lose that part. Like people who just want to do kind of Tolkien like Lord of the Rings type stuff lose a lot of the themes. I mean, even Peter Jackson in the movies lost some of the things, or I think misunderstood some of Tolkien's themes when they made that, that translation. And I think it happens all the time in people's games. So you end up with the physical parts of the story, but not that backing of what makes it sit with us, what makes it resonate. Let's see. Brian Smith says they usually write up pitches around tropes and themes. In play, though, it takes engaged players to get those themes to connect. Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing with it, is it can be informative to you. Your players don't even necessarily have to see it, but I do think that it adds something. And even as a GM, I think it adds something, because what can keep driving you to develop new parts is to keep pushing on that theme. Even if your players don't understand it, almost makes it a thought experiment. They don't know that I'm trying to do this love conquers all, right? Which makes it even kind of better in some ways. They get to be my guinea pigs in this world where I can just keep kind of throwing stuff, throwing these situations at them that are targeting that are testing that. And I can see whether these folks who are in this, but they're not aware of it, whether they choose maybe the easier path to discard love in favor of power or whatever, or that they take that harder road. I mean, that kind of adds to those things of what keeps you as a GM engaged. Brian Smith says it takes some reflection on the campaign events as a whole and awareness in play to realize those things are there, when even finding clues for a puzzle can elude them. All very true. All very true. But I think some of the stuff's additive too as the GM. Like it's that kind of inner game you play as the GM. You can have fun exploring these themes. And it's something that, look, when the game is over, you finish your campaign, you can go back to the players and say, hey, did you know that I was kind of looking at this and how you guys played into it? And that makes it interesting. And I think even then, just knowing it after the fact, I think is going to make it more memorable for them when they go through, knowing that at the end of it, that these things were in play and how they measured up to it. Were they able to preserve love in this time of chaos or not? Okay, I'm going super slow here because I keep sidebarring, but I think it's good stuff. We do have some tools for responsible play. They mentioned lines and veils in the X card. I'm not going to read through these. You should look at them in more depth. They are both, I think, good tools, and I'm glad that they're mentioned here somewhat prominently in the text. And you can go, they don't have they give you the definitions of lines and veils. And for the X cards, they point you to tinyurl.com/x-card-rpg. So check that out. A welcoming environment. The role of game master comes with the responsibility of ensuring you and the rest of the players have a rewarding, fun time during the game. Games can deal with difficult subjects and have stressful moments, but fundamentally, Pathfinder is a leisure activity. It can remain so only if the players follow the social contract and respect one another. And again, it's good that they pointed out. I almost wish that was more prominent and in the player side of it too, because I think that's another thing, that responsibility shouldn't just be on the GM. I think the GM, who oftentimes sets the environment, oftentimes hosts the environment, yes, there is a little bit of an extra emphasis on the GM as a referee, as a shepherd of the players, so to speak. But I think put that up for everybody to see. Hey, welcoming environment, be, all those things that come along with that. It's not just the GM who should be. The GM kind of is maybe first among equals in terms of their responsibility there, but that should be something for everybody. They have a section here on objectionable objectionable content. Basically, figure out what everyone's comfortable with. Always a good thing. Again, go back to lines and veils and X cards. There's something they're calling the Pathfinder baseline, which I suppose we should read. You might find that your players don't have much to say on the topic of objectionable content, and just assume that general societal mores will keep the most uncomfortable topics out of the game. That's not always enough, as that approach relies on shared assumptions that aren't always accurate. The following is a set of basic assumptions that works for many groups, which you can modify to fit your preferences and those of other players. So basically, this is something that you could kind of copy and paste into your pitch doc if you were putting together a pitch and you wanted to. I definitely think it's a good idea. Part of that session zero, or again, with the pitch before your session zero, set up the stuff that's generally speaking allowed and that you might go into versus stuff you're not going into. Here are their bullet points. Bloodshed, injuries, and even dismemberment might be described. However, excessive descriptions of gore and cruelty should be avoided. Romantic and sexual relationships can happen in the game, but players should avoid being overly suggestive. Sex always happens off screen. Because attempts at initiating a relationship between player characters can be uncomfortably similar to one player hitting on another, this should generally be avoided and is entirely inappropriate when playing with strangers. Avoid excessively gross or scatological descriptions. And then, on top of that, the following acts should never be performed by player characters: torture, rape, non-consensual sexual contact or sexual threats, harm to children, including sexual abuse, owning slaves or profiting from the slave trade, reprehensible uses of mind control magic. Villains might engage in such acts, but they won't happen on screen or won't be described in detail. Many groups choose to not have villains engage in these activities at all, keeping these reprehensible acts out of mind entirely. I mean, I think the only thing that players might have an issue with, the torture thing comes up. Players like to torture. I feel like players have a much. It's weird because I think most people in real life have the understanding. I think that torture doesn't really work. Usually, people tend to just say what they feel like the torturer wants to hear, and so you don't end up getting really great information. It comes up out of, I think, weakness actually, and pressure and misinformation and just emergencies where you just feel like I just need to try because I'm getting nothing. So even if I get something wrong, maybe that's an improvement on nothing. So people engage with, or of course the fact that they're villainous and they just don't care. I'll just take the information and I'll vet it later. But in game, I think a lot of folks, people will go and start to say, well, I torture them to get for information. They don't necessarily go into the details of how whatever they're doing to these poor creatures, but they will engage with torture. But I would never, if I saw that in the game saying, hey man, you guys are heroes, or at least you're just vaguely non-villainous, or at least you're not villainous enough to engage in torture, so we're not going to cover that in the game. I would be fine with it. I would never be like, I'm not playing this game because it doesn't allow me to torture people. Fine. Social splash damage. As important as it is to take care of yourself and other players in your game, be mindful of your group's impact on the other people around you. In other words, if you're in a gaming shop or a cafe or somewhere where you have folks around you, be cognizant of them and the fact that they might overhear all the horrible things that you've decided you're allowing your players to engage with. So, understand the space you're playing in, basically. Even if you're playing at someone's home, they may have significant others, kids, friends, other people around them. So don't get into stuff that you're not comfortable with them hearing, or that people have told you, hey man, don't talk about torture around my 5-year-old when they're around. Please, appreciate that and take that to heart. Ian Boyd says we're the villains now. Ryan Smith says, be socially aware of your surroundings. Yes. And then Helsente says, not as heavy as I expected. Oh, I see. So I missed their first part. Helsente says, Paizo in Session Zero, of course, they're heavy on the should, but not as heavy as they expected. Yeah, look, what are they going to say? You must. They're not. Maybe they should. Maybe they should say must, but they're not going to do that. Character creation at the onset of a new campaign. The players will create their pair of characters. Okay, that's great. Work with the players to determine which rule options are available. And yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, this is one of those things I wish, again, they would highlight more, even with the player-facing stuff. Talk to your GMs about what's available. One of the things that irks me, and I'm going to say the 5th edition crowd, I know it's not specific to them in terms of it happens everywhere, but I feel like more often with them, this idea that everything in every splat book that's invented should be allowed, and if it's not allowed, then you are a horrible GM. So set out, again, part of your pitch document, part of your session 0, talk about the species, the classes, whatever combinations that are available. If there are any that aren't available, just think about it up front, and then if, allow it to be a conversation with your players if they don't want to, but feel free to pick and choose. If there are things you don't want, then I think that's fine. I've never had a problem with that, but maybe keep in mind that from a modern game perspective, a lot of players and GMs both seem to be kind of touchy about what's allowed and what's not allowed. So just be aware of that, but also don't be afraid to put limits on there for your own sanity, for your own well-being. Let's see. Helsente says, anyone mature enough to organize a game session, group situation, campaign, they're probably deciding for themselves what's appropriate and what's not. Yes, Helsente, I don't disagree with that, but I think the key point here is not just to know that yourself, but to communicate it, because often the GMs decide all this stuff. But then, as I'm sure you've seen, experience, I think everyone has, just as often GMs don't communicate those things to their players. And it's this, you go through this period of discovering as you're playing, watching the rest of the group, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how far people can go. Should I be engaging in this or not? Or kind of all these kind of things that have been this gray zone that is part of that almost initiation process when you join a game, whether it's in a store, someone's house, online, offline, and you're trying to figure out how things work. And it could be a lot more straightforward, and you might, especially in terms of figuring out if a game, hey, this game's not for me, it might not take sessions of uncomfortableness and weirdness and what's going on here. If they just had in their session 0 or in that pitch document, here are the things that we're into that we're going to be exploring, here are the things we're not, and all this, that. So it's not just, yeah, you have it in your mind. It's thinking about it both. You may have it in your mind, make it concrete, think about it thoughtfully, write it out, and then actually communicate it, which is different than just having it in your brain. Preparing, okay, so preparing an adventure, published adventures, yes, creating adventures, okay, locations, encounters. I'm skipping through this stuff. It's nice, but it seems to be kind of fluffy. I'm trying to see if there's more concrete things, telling us, hey, memorable settings have mysterious and fantastical locations. Like, okay, yeah, that's great, but it doesn't really say much. A robust set of encounters forms the backbone of your adventure. Okay. Can feature combat, can also be hazards. All right. Characters, there's a sidebar here on characters with disabilities, which is great. I'm not going to go through these, but again, I like this. I've had players who want to engage with this stuff, or you might even have characters with disabilities in real life that want to play empowered versions of themselves. So I think giving some guidance on that. So they have a section on blindness or impaired vision, deafness or being hard of hearing, missing limbs, or mental illness and chronic illness. All good stuff. Using rarity and access. So basically just talking about rewards. Common, you can use uncommon and rare rules elements to reward characters. These still have the same value and approximate power as any other treasure at the same price. There's a bit more special because they hail from distant lands or have unusual or surprising abilities. That's kind of neat to think about. I always thought of uncommon and rare to be a value thing, that the things that are rarer are more valuable. They're more powerful things that are uncommon. But it's interesting to think that they might be different and less common in the sense that you're not going to run across it a lot. It's an interesting way to think about it. Different locations. The rarities in this book assume you're playing in the inner sea region of Golarion, where most Pathfinder games are set. These rarities are also suitable for most Western medieval fantasy games, but if you want to alter it, go ahead. Okay. Treasure. Here we go. Building encounters. Now we're talking. The most common type of encounter is a combat encounter, where the PCs face other creatures. Combat encounters are strictly governed by rules. The guidelines that follow will help you build combat encounters that pose appropriate challenges for your group. Building hazard encounters works the same way. Social encounters are more freeform and are up to you as the GM to design. To build a combat encounter, first design how the encounter fits in the adventure as a whole. Then estimate how much of a threat you want the encounter to pose using one of 5 categories below. So I think the thing is that it's taking the same sort of narrative system as 5th edition. I mean, and look, older modules do this too. If you're playing a 5th level adventure, then this adventure's for 5th to 7th level, adventures. Then that's how the encounters are tuned, which is different if you're going to play this. If you want to play more sandboxy, in which case all kinds of things can be running around the wilderness, or you could look at it that way. But of course, you could adapt this. I think you could convert these fairly similar. You could look at if, say, like in the old school way, where basically the median or middle average kind of difficulty of a monster on level 1 of a dungeon was 1, 2, then 2, 3, 4, 5. As you would go down dungeon levels, then you could probably do something like that and just say so many moderate threat, maybe one that's extreme threat, or you could roll dice. You could do that, but it seems like we're going in the direction of having, which makes sense because what game this is kind of in comparison to and kind of in competition with, and also from 3.5, 3.x, Pathfinder 1e is some kind of challenge rating CR type system. So we have trivial threat, low threat, moderate threat, severe threat, and extreme threat. So that's 1, 2, 3. So we have 4 or 5 different levels of encounter. This is all relative to the party level, or a level of the dungeon, or however you want to quantify that. Once we have the threat level, we get an XP budget. And then you choose the creatures based on your XP budget, and then they have some modifiers for different character sizes. You increase your XP budget for each character beyond the 4th one. And I suppose, do you decrease it in the inverse? Let's see. Yes, you do. And then we have some creature XPs and rolls. So, I see. If it's party level -4, your XP budget's 10, it's a low threat lackey. If it's at the same level as the party, it's XP 40, and that's any standard creature, low level threat or boss. And then if you go party up to, say, party level +4, 160 XP, extreme threat solo boss. But there's nothing, and it would be nice to have a couple of examples to kind of show how that works. Maybe there will be later on, but there's not yet. We go right into running a game session. And then, there we have planning a session. And it gets a little bit, looks like plan a time for everybody to arrive, and also try to set a time when the game will begin, right? Everyone incumbents, we're going to meet at 7:30 p.m. and then we'll start playing at 8. And then have an end time in mind. That's also a good idea, so that you can figure out about how many hours you have to play. We're going from 8 to 11, so we got 3 hours. Starting a session, once everyone's ready, get everyone's attention, then we have some bullet points on things you can try. These are good. I like these. Recap what happened previously, establish where the characters are at this moment, remind the characters that they've got that hero point, which is good, establish goals, and then commence adventuring. I think those are good. I wouldn't mind. I know a lot of GMs have fun. I think you could do something, again, bringing in your party, have either a designated player be the recapper, or you could even award someone with a second hero point if they do the recap that week. I've seen lots of different methods people do to kind of spread that recapping around, and having different players recap it or taking turns is another way to keep them engaged in the game and wanting to take notes, so on and so forth. And I like the idea of establishing goals. Hey, remember where you guys are and what you were doing, right? That if establish where you are is like, okay, we're on the 3rd level of the dungeon. We had just had that battle and we were in the aftermath. That's great. But then also, almost a reminder, what were we doing in this dungeon? Oh yeah, we were going to try to find the MacGuffin that's in somewhere on level 5, and we don't know where the stairs to level 4 are, or whatever that is. Great. Now we know where we are, and we have this sort of, we're just reinforcing where we are going. Running a session. During a session, you're in charge of keeping the action moving, the game's action moving, managing different modes of play, fielding questions, making rules decisions. You'll also want to keep a rough eye on the time so you can end when most convenient for the group. And I would also say don't be afraid to end a little bit early. I think often we want to push it, and I know we all want to get the most gaming out of our sessions as possible. But if you're 20 minutes left, but you're at a really good kind of stopping point or cliffhanger or something else, then just end it early. Go to a Q&A session, have a little wrap up, go into one of your, hey, what do you guys think? Do something, but take advantage if you have it. Don't feel like I got to go all the way to this particular the top of the hour. That puts you in a funky spot. Or I usually like if the characters have a big decision that they have to make, but then we have like say 20 minutes left. I don't try to push them to make that choice unless I really need it for the next session. But if they're kind of in the dungeon but there's a lot going on and there's a kind of a fraught decision, I'll be like, okay, let's stop now, so you guys have the downtime during the week or the whatever until our next session to kind of think about it. And I'm not going to force you to make that choice now just to get another 15 minutes or whatever it is. The spotlight. As you run the game, keep track of who has the spotlight. I know a lot of folks love this, like spotlighting different players kind of thing. And I think there's some truth to that. You want to make sure that someone's not dominating. At the same time, I don't know. I'm not a huge proponent of that to a certain degree because I feel like it becomes, for me anyway, and other people may disagree, I think it becomes very apparent what you're doing. And then it can feel artificial, I guess. But I think keep in mind, I think if players have built their characters around certain things, I don't necessarily try to come up with here's where this is the rogue's turn to do roguey things. But if you have a world with a lot of different things going on in situations that are open ended, then I think a lot of these players can find ways to shine if you allow them. And I think it's almost more for me. I think about it is it's more about making sure everybody has the space and there's enough, like the materials are in place for different party members to feel like they can do things and not A, feel like they have to wait till it's their turn, or B, feel like nothing they're going to be able to do matters. At least that's how I like to look at it. Let's see. Making it, Helsente says, making it only that simple straitjackets the DM to distribute attention only that way. Yeah, it can be. It can have some negative effects if done incorrectly. And then Phil says, big decisions, they tend to ping each player to get input, but otherwise let them groove at their own tempo. If they're showing up, they're in it to win. I agree. And then Helsente says, involving engaging players is really important. Yes. I just think that for me anyway, maybe it's just my style, is I want to make sure that that's happening all the time, that I'm giving players the space in every situation to get their input. Part of why I like initiative in time-sensitive things is everyone gets to roll initiative, which means there's basically an equal chance of anybody getting that first spot. And so even if someone is kind of that, and I've been that way as a player, been like the first, quickest to respond, quickest to just get out there. In a lot of situations, rolling initiative forces me, maybe I do have this great thing, but I'm last in line. So I have to wait until the person who might be the person who's the most not quickest to fire, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, just sometimes the most thoughtful player, it ends up in front first, whatever, it gets to set the tone because of that. So there are different ways you can approach it besides the idea of turning the spotlight and just beaming it down on this player. Okay, distractions, interruptions. Yeah, you're going to get distracted, you're going to get interrupted, kind of deal with it. Adjudicating the rules. As the GM, you are responsible for solving any rules disputes, remembering that keeping your game moving is more important than being 100% correct. Looking up rules at the table can slow the game down, so in many cases, it's better to make your best guess rather than scour the book for the exact rule. Yes, I think that's all good. Phil says they use group initiative to make sure everyone is part of the planning part of the round. And the question being like to ask somebody, do you want to help someone else or have your own plan? Yeah, I think that's a good thing too, is to give that, because players can get kind of what's the word? They can get I don't want to say bullied, but they can get kind of pushed into just taking actions that are subservient to the player who's more gung-ho, when in reality it might have something else. So I think I like that kind of question of reinforcing they have a choice. No, you don't have to aid the barbarian in doing this ridiculous thing the barbarian has decided to do just because they've been loud and they're kind of pushy, right? And yeah, going to them almost on the side and saying, hey man, you got choices if you want to do something else. I think this is good advice about, hey, having to do something on the fly. Just make sure your players are aware of it, and that whatever rules lawyers you have in the group are fine. That, hey, look, We can verify a rule later and then write that down for the future. But no, I'm probably not going to go back and redo a decision that went against you because we didn't know the mechanic at the time. We're gonna deal with it. So yeah, if we have it on hand, great. If we don't, well, you can look it up later. Also great and go forward. But we're not going to spend endless time, rehashing, going through and sort of getting into the weeds. We want to go forward. We want to go forward. Helsende says quarterbacks can quietly kill the engagement for the table. Yeah, absolutely. I forget there's a term for it for board games that's good, but I can't remember what the term is. But yes, quarterbacking and yeah, anybody that kind of just takes lead when not necessarily everybody wants to, but they happen to be the loudest and strongest voice, it can be tough. So there's some bullet points here I'm going to skip only because I'm just cognizant of time, but they give us some nice advice. I guess I'll read through some of these. If you don't know how long a quick task takes, go with one action or two actions. If you're not sure what action a task takes, look up the most similar basic action. When two sides are opposed, have rolled one against the other's DC. If an effect raises or lowers chance of success, go with +1s or -1s. If you're not sure how difficult a significant challenge should be, use the DC for the party's level. If you're making up an effect, creatures should be incapacitated or killed only on a crit. If you don't know what check to use, pick the most appropriate skill. Use the character's daily preparations as the time to reset anything that lasts roughly a day. So basically, just have things reset on a long rest if you don't have a compelling reason to pick another time frame. And don't worry if but they're about to take a long rest, so it's shorter than I want it to be. Don't worry about that stuff. Or just make it the next long rest. Just keep it simple and don't fall too in love with your effects and things like that. Let stuff go. When a character accomplishes something noteworthy that doesn't have rules for XP, award them XP for an accomplishment. They've got that described a little bit later. When PCs fail at a task, look for where they might fail forward, meaning the story moves forward with a negative consequence rather than failure halting progress entirely. So you get a little hint to fail forward. They could probably go into that in more detail. I've actually was just thinking today of doing a video on essentially what I think are the powerful effects of setbacks, which is a little bit of not an anti-fail forward thing, but just hey, you don't always have to fail forward. Sometimes there are really good things can come in particular game types of games and things with setbacks, which is when you don't fail forward, you hit that wall and you have a setback. I think there's actually some positive things around there, but other times fail forward is good. I just wish maybe, just looking at this, if you're a new GM and new to everything, fail forward probably isn't a term you're familiar with. And maybe, I know they give a little bit here, but it might be interesting to give more. And there have been some great, people have done some great things with showing different types of actions and then different types of negative consequences that you can match up to those. And something like that might have been nice. Might have been nice there. Sharing responsibility, a little sidebar, that's good. Hey, just because you're the DM and ostensibly in charge doesn't mean you have to do all the extra work to make the campaign run. Absolutely. And then we get another sidebar on Paizo's published adventures, which I'm going to skip. If you pick up this Humble Bundle right now, I think it's Humble Bundle that's got all this Pathfinder stuff. You get some. So look through them. Phil says, while the wizard flips through their spells, the fighter says, I would like to reclaim my time. Yes, exactly. Special circumstances. Just basically you can do some modifiers. +2 or -2 for major circumstances and maximum penalties around +4, -4. That's pretty good. Probably general rule of thumb. And then there's some bit on incorporating additional options. And then we have some bit on organized gameplay in the Pathfinder Society. The next section here, and I think we're moving slower. Already at 50 minutes. We'll see what we can do here. Running modes of play. Okay. Encounters. So the stakes for encounters should be moderate to high. Encounters always have significant stakes, and they're played in a step-by-step time frame to reflect that. So I think the one thing that's interesting here is just maybe to keep in mind, though they don't necessarily they're saying it, but you can think about it almost as an implied idea, is think about the stakes of what you're doing, and then think about whether it's worth having the encounter or not. Not that things can't be fun or interesting for different reasons, but if you find that you are having your party get involved with a whole bunch of really low stakes in terms of what's happening, something I can think about is low stakes. Like if you're running sort of an urban kind of adventure or segment of an adventure, and the party's, you keep rolling for encounters every block, and they keep getting attacked by hobos, And the hobos aren't challenging. They don't have anything to do with what's going on. It's literally just hobos in the street because I guess you're in San Diego where there's lots of hobos and they're angry and it's unseasonably cold. It's happening. And you might, and as a referee, you might say on the one hand, I am trying to demonstrate the realness and the diversity and the dynamics of this city. So yes, there are hobos everywhere and you're just in their way and they're fighting you for it. Okay, great. But you can also think about it and go, you know what? This stuff isn't going anywhere. It's just time wasting. The party's soon going to tire about increasing numbers of hobos coming out of the woodwork to pelt them with stones and their own excrement. Maybe I should move on. That might be a good way to think about it. Time scale. Minute consists of 10 rounds. We're doing, very quick things and then actions and reactions. Basically the combat stuff. Brian Smith says the verisimilitude in Hobotopia. They are the tabletop role-playing game. That's right. Hobo mobs on every encounter table. Absolutely. Absolutely. Choosing adversaries' actions, players often coordinate and plan to be as efficient as possible, but their adversaries might not. Yes. Make sure to build in mistakes. Make sure not to act. Yeah, it's hard to do this, but try not to act with perfect information because your adversaries, unless they've got they're running scry 24/7. They're not going to know everything the party's doing. They're not going to know everything the party has. You can have them take notes on things, but think of reasonably what they might know, what they might not know. Something that always irked me as a player, and I know the GMs do this. Well, the party does these things. Shouldn't the enemy know they do these things? Yes, if the enemy survives. But if we're going in every encounter and leaving no survivors, who is going back to tell the big boss that we like to use fireball or we like to draw them into this thing or we have this certain ability? So if you're going to do that, set up circumstances where the party can actually see someone running away to tell their people, which I will generally do. I remember specifically setting up a lot of encounters where there'd be fighting some people and there'd be somebody else like on horseback on top of a ridge in a distance watching them. And this is specifically to communicate to the players your tactics, what you're doing is being watched, and this person's going to get away before you're going to be able to fight through these minions to get to them, and potentially they're going to know things. Like I literally was trying to communicate to them that. But I had that person there, and if the party had done something, if the wizard had said, but I've got this 1,000-foot long-range weapon, I'm going to kill that person, and they use it, and then they kill the rest of the party, and then I would just have my big bad guy not know stuff. But just try to keep in mind who's surviving to go back and tell them. What do they reasonably know? If the party hasn't used their big, the wizard's has a 4th level spell, but they haven't used it, then the bad guy probably doesn't know they've got it. They may not, they only have it. Just, try to think. Think imperfectly, or really just try to take notes of what they could know and then use that. Brian Smith says, classic mini-boss who they see multiple times on the ridge during mob fights, and they finally get to face them. It's so satisfying. Absolutely. Indeed. We have a section here on bypassing encounters. Think on your feet. What happens if you plan to fight or a challenge and the PCs find a way to avoid entirely? Ooh, what happened? This could leave them behind in XP or cause them to miss important information or treasure. The treasure part information, yes, probably depending on what it is, you might just want to give them the XP because they got around your encounter. Probably depends on the nature of the encounter, but you're going to have to think on your feet. A little section here on playing without a grid. That's great. Acknowledging that that Pathfinder rules are built to playing encounters on a 1-inch grid, but you can play without it. You can play Theater of the Mind. You can play whatever you want to play. We have a section on ending encounters. Combat encounter typically ends when all the creatures on one side are killed or knocked unconscious. I really would like... Oh, here it says one side might surrender when almost all its members are defeated, or if spells or skills are thoroughly demoralize them. Yeah, I'd like more here. Maybe they'll give us more later on, but this would be like... I'd like more. They do say here you could fight. You can decide a fight is over if there's no challenge left, which is good. You use reactions. I don't know if Pathfinder gets into them. Reactions and morale to figure out what's happening. Reactions, obviously, when an encounter is just beginning. And then morale, I like to roll at the beginning too. And certainly during your encounter. Don't have everybody fight to the death. Nobody wants to fight to the death. Even animals don't generally fight to the death unless, they're trapped and they literally can't get out, or it's a thing where they feel like they're protecting their young or something out, or they're, whatever. They're about to die from starvation. So either they're going to kill you and eat you, or they're going to die. So they're just going to do it. They're almost never going to fight to the death. Only the most fervent supporters are going to fight to the death if they have a chance. And usually during combat, especially, I feel like with D&D combat, is there's going to be this point where you kind of know that unless someone's going to pull something crazy out of their hat, and as a GM, you know that they have anything to pull out of their hat, they're not going to win. It's just all about attrition. And maybe, oh, well, we could possibly take down the fighter, but we're still going to end up losing the fight. Don't just play out the string to play it out. Have them think about, can we retreat? Can we retreat? And hey, go warn the rest of our fellows what's coming. Should we just surrender? Should we? Is there a nuclear option that if we're going to die, can we do something? Bring the ceiling of the cavern down on top of us to at least eliminate them. What can we do? Think about what we can do, and think about it earlier than you think you should, because sometimes people wait too long, and it ends up being where you think. I ran into this in 4th edition where I felt like, oh, I'll wait till it's bloodied and they'll figure it out. But then sometimes you get bloodied and then immediately be down to not having much time left, and then it's too late, especially if you're playing in a system like Pathfinder or 5th edition where your parties have lots of abilities that can lock you down. Make it so you can't move. Make it so you lose actions. That's why oftentimes the balance is so tough, because you start losing actions. You think, oh, I'm the playing this creature and he's got these actions and he can fly and you do this and you do that and you can do 5 actions on every turn. But then, oh wait, no, this guy stunned me. This guy did this other thing. This guy tripped me and I fell down. And suddenly I thought I had 5 actions. Now I have 1 or I have none. And I'm just stunned, and they just keep stunning me over and over again. All it takes is that one missed save can just start a cavalcade of issues. So you can't. So think about it quickly. I only think it takes a round or 2 to kind of know I'm hitting them, I'm not hitting them, and then start planning. Okay, maybe I'll give it one more round and see if I can score a crit or do whatever to change the tide. Or I know I've got the spell. Then after that, I got to think about, how am I getting out of here? How are we salvaging this if we're not winning? Brian Smith says D&D players won't let the fight end unless they can murder every last enemy. Well, this is true. They oftentimes won't. But yeah, but this is why, play your NPCs to what they want to do. And if they surrender and the PCs start going around slitting their throats, then you can play with the consequences of those actions, right? Social encounters. This is pretty flexible for the GM, but we have some bullet points of examples: proving someone's innocence in front of a judge, convincing a neighboring monarch to help defend against an invasion, besting a rival bard in a battle of wits, exposing a villain's deception for a noble court. You can have initiatives in social encounters, and then you can try to measure success and progress, and then you can deal with consequences. We've got exploration. Exploration mode is intentionally less regimented than encounters. As a result, during exploration, you'll be making judgment calls on just about everything that happens. So they're not going with the more regimented approach that I don't remember 3rd edition, how regimented they're. I really should pull out my 3rd edition books at some point. I only have a few. I don't remember if they did away with the kind of more sort of white box at least through 1st edition kind of regimentation. I don't even remember 2nd edition if they got rid of a lot of that, calculating your 10-minute turns, yada, yada, yada. Stakes for exploration should be low to moderate. The time scale, second or, minutes, or was it hours? Maybe even days. Because I think exploration in this case is both, say, dungeoneering time and travel time. I think they merge them into one. And then actions and reactions. Exploration isn't broken in rounds, but they assume the PCs are spending part of their time using actions. If they have specific action they want to use, they should ask. But essentially, you're not in that kind of fast. The idea is you're not in combat. You're not doing that kind of second to second act-react type cadence. Exploration activities. We went through these earlier on, but they can, detect magic. They can follow the expert. They can investigate. They can search. Hey, when you're exploring, set the party's order. Set that marching order. You can have adverse terrain and weather, which can adversely affect exploration speeds. We have a sidebar on the exploration activities that will get more detail later. But we have that kind of a list, and then they're also covered in chapter 4, and then also a little bit on improvising new activities, which is good. They have the concept of difficult terrain, hazardous terrain, Then they also mentioned dangerous crevasses, swampy bogs, quicksand, similar dangers are environmental hazards. So kind of treated more as an encounter. And then with hazards, you can also have them roll initiative. So talking about that, like kind of like I was talking about, transitioning from exploration, which is freeform, to encounter. So you roll initiative. And then initiative after reactions and choosing the type of roll. Because remember, mostly using perception for your initiative, but you can have other ones. In the example play at the beginning, they mentioned, or they had one of the characters use their stealth skill because they'd hidden for their reaction. And then thinking about, especially for combat, kind of where characters are placed. Onto resting, characters require 8 hours of sleep each day. I think they went through this before. I don't know if there's anything else here that I want to scrub through. We have another sidebar on monitoring spell durations, multiple encounters. A 1 minute spell should last for multiple encounters only if the encounters happen in very close proximity. So basically, if you're not sure how much time it takes when combat ends in the aftermath, those 1 minute spells basically expire. Before a fight, casting advantageous spells before a fight, sometimes called pre-buffing, gives the characters a big advantage since they can spend more combat rounds on offensive actions instead of preparatory ones. If the players have the drop on their foes, you usually can let each character cast one spell or prepare some similar way and then roll initiative. So that's a nice thing you can do. I don't know if you need to mechanize it in this way. So they have if they have a surprise round, they can just use their actions. Or if the enemy's coming around the corner in 30 seconds, then they're unaware of the party, then the party can cast. They basically 30 seconds. Given that most spells, or maybe all spells, just take 6 seconds to cast, means that they would have pretty much all the time to cast at least 3 or 4 or 5 spells. Watches and surprise attacks. Paizo says pre-buffing, so that's what they're calling it these days. Yep, I guess that's what the cool kids call it. Adventuring parties usually put a few people on guard to watch out for danger while the others rest. If a surprise encounter would occur during rest, you can roll a die to randomly determine which character is on watch at the time. All characters roll initiative. Sleeping characters typically roll perception with a -4 status penalty for being unconscious. They don't automatically wake up when rolling initiative, but they might roll a perception check to wake up at the start of their turn due to noise. That's not a bad thing. And then they've got some group sizes and then watch durations. It's fine. Daily preparations, spellcasters, and all that stuff. Starvation and thirst. Typically, characters eat and drink enough to survive comfortably. When they can't, they're fatigued until they do. Without water, after a number of days equal to the creature's constitution modifier +1, the creature takes 1d4 damage each hour that can't be healed until it quenches its thirst. After the same amount of time without food, it takes 1 damage each day that can't be healed until it eats. So I don't think that's bad. And if you have a strong constitution, you can probably last 4 or 5 days. Then, yeah, it's going to start by the hour. Look out. You can get some stuff for downtime. I'm not going to go into downtime too much. Playing on downtime day, cooperation checks, longer periods of downtime, events, average progress. You can just, okay, great. Cost of living, buying and selling, long-term rest, retraining. Retraining to get into time, instruction costs, and disallowed options. I'm trying to fly through some of the stuff because it's not that it's bad or good. It seems most of their advice actually seems pretty good, but this stuff is very basic. It's basically kind of in text. I'm trying to get to the more meaty, mechanical bits. But I think as a layout, I think it's a good layout. They're giving us kind of general senses, and I assume they're going to give us more detailed stuff. I'm already at the top of the hour, or at least 1 hour of recording, so I'm trying to get through a bunch. So I think, given that we're all fairly comfortable with difficulty challenges, I think that's the difficulty classes, I should say. I'm not going to get into it, but we do have the tables that they give in terms of if you just need a simple one, you can look at the proficiencies and the difficulty classes. You can also do difficulty classes by level, and then also they have one for spell level, and then you can adjust the difficulty. And they give you a table of a difficulty adjustment. So all good stuff. You're on the fly. You need to figure out things. There's multiple ways to determine what the difficulty level is, and then ways to make those adjustments. So if you're on the 10th level of the dungeon, and you're looking at that, and I'm using that by level, and I say, okay, the DC should be 27, and then I say, yeah, but they're on the 10th level of the dungeon, but I've determined this is very easy, then I can say, hey, I adjust that down to -10. So it's extremely easy, but it is on the 10th level of the dungeon. So we went from 27 -10. Therefore, the final DC is 17. Bang, zoom, done. Great. And then we have stuff on group attempts. This is kind of cool. You can determine that a task requires a minimum proficiency, which again is nice. And I like things that differentiate folks that have training versus folks that just may be naturally gifted. So, hey, some of this stuff you need to be trained to even take a shot at it. Otherwise, your natural giftedness, you just don't know the technical stuff enough, which I am down with. And then we get into specific actions such as crafting, earning income, gathering information, identifying magic, learning a spell, recalling knowledge. And then there's a little bit on, let's see, what was that? Alternative skills, additional knowledge, creature identification, and then a sidebar on determining the scope of lore. And then we have a table here on creature identification skills. So what creature traits work with which skills? So for example, if a creature is an aberration, the skill that might, identify them is actually occultism. If they're fey, it would be nature. If it's a fiend, it would be religion. If it's a fungus, it's nature. If it's a humanoid, it'd be society. And there's, other ones. So that's kind of neat. I didn't see anything about rolling multiple checks. That would have been a good one. That's a good call out. This is all about difficulty classes, though, not actually doing the rolls. Did we miss that? Did they talk about it? No, I didn't say anything about this. But this is just about figuring out the checks, but I didn't see something on number of rolls. I do think that more games should definitely put upfront guidance into handling rolls and what to do with the kind of me too sort of thing. Under what circumstances do you allow it? Do you just do it? I think they did say something on kind of group efforting. So maybe you would say if the amount of people do it, you just do it as one group action. But still, that might come a thing as, well, we try it again. And then what do you do kind of with that? But I didn't say anything specific, but it might have been there because I think there was some section on group, handling things as a group. On to rewards. We already went over hero points. We've got experience points. XP rewards for adversaries and hazards, for accomplishments. Accomplishments being character actions that move the story forward. I'm not so big on those. Or if I was going to do them, I'd want them to be very player-facing. Because what is moving the story forward? I mean, I know a lot of times with the narrative, okay, you're doing these steps. Hey, you complete this step. But I think that's already sort of, I imagine it's kind of baked in. It doesn't seem to be really maybe you could say that's kind of their milestone thing. I don't know. I didn't see anything about milestones, so they're still sticking with experience points. But maybe that is their little shout out to, hey, you want to give people kind of milestone rewards. I'm not sure. Let's see. Brian Smith says about group checks. Maybe you would then consider a group difficulty class that may be higher than a single PC's difficulty class. Yeah, I don't know. There might be a number of ways to handle that. But yes, I think having more upfront. I didn't see anything at least emphasized on dealing with it, which I think more books should tackle because it's one of those things. I mean, I think maybe ultimately GMs should just not get too caught up in a particular challenge, but it can be kind of annoying. And you might end up like, why do I bother locking doors if they're just going to brute force the pick locks thing all the time? But that's where you can get into the failing forward and those negative consequences. And there's probably a section of a book that could be written to sort of help walk through that so that you can at least figure out how you want to navigate those better. Treasure by level, currency, other types of treasure and rarity. We have tables. We have advancement speeds. Advancement speed, fast, standard, or slow. Fast, 800 XP. Standard, 1000 XP. Slow, 1200 XP. I haven't seen XP tables. Is it all the same? I'm not sure. This is a DM fact book. Pretty much. I'm sure someone could make a zine about just putting a bunch of kind of DM, I don't know, best practices or just DM advice stuff. Probably would be worthwhile. Different item levels, different party sizes, treasure for new characters, item selections. We get a table on character wealth, which I guess is maybe where they should be, or what you could give them, where they should be. Not sure. Then we get to environment. Primarily used during exploration, environment rules bring the locales your party travels through to life. So this is your, I guess, your kind of hex crawling, your wilderness travel stuff. Environmental damage. Some environmental features or natural disasters deal damage. And then we get categories, minor through massive. It tells you amount of damage. If you don't, so if you don't know, if you want to estimate there's a hailstorm and it's nasty and you feel like it's harmful in that way, you can figure out, oh, it's minor. So you would figure out the damage range between one, in this case, between 1d6 and 2d6. We had just aquatic environments, current, that a little bit on currents, invisibility, Arctic environments, ice and snow. There's not a whole lot here. They're just giving us little blurbs. So that's why I'm not kind of reading through it too much. Deserts, rubble and sand. Just remember, rocky deserts are actually more common than sandy deserts, even though in our minds, I think, at least I always think of sandy deserts. Forests, canopies, trees and undergrowth, mountains, chasms, cliffs, and rubble. We get a nice table of environmental features and their page references, which is nice. And also the band of kind of proficiency difficulty class. So avalanches is expert to legendary. A bog is untrained to trained. I like that's really nice. Doors, it's just say see this page because there's too much variance. Same with portcullises. I like that. It's interesting they're environmental features. Lava is an environmental feature, and so is a portcullis. That's cool. Sidebar on terrain rules. We've got difficult terrain, also greater difficult terrain, and hazardous terrain. I think hazardous terrain damages creatures, and then I think difficult terrain and greater difficult terrain are all about how long it takes you to move through it. You can see here that I think something that differentiates Pathfinder from 2nd edition from 5th edition is that there's definitely more granularity, right? There's granularity in terms of the levels of success and failure you can have. There's granularity in terms of, hey, and we just have difficult terrain or not. Here we've got basically 3 different levels of terrain. So if you like that granularity, Pathfinder's kind of got something for you, which I think is kind of their pitch, their sales pitch, maybe to the 5e crowd is, hey, if you thought the 5e had gone too far in terms of not providing enough detail, we've got more without it being Pathfinder 1e 3.x, which I think is probably what's helped put them in kind of a weird spot, right? You're in this area where, yeah, we got more detail than 5th edition, but not as much as Pathfinder 1e, which may put it in that kind of gray area. As most 5th edition players probably are happy with the amount of detail in 5th edition, aren't necessarily looking for more, so that kind of limits their audience. And then the folks that might have been in Pathfinder 1st edition, maybe they don't want to lose that detail, so you end up in this kind of gray area spot. Brian Smith says they like these terrain breakdowns, gives them a great little toolbox of elements to pluck out and throw out during encounter building. Yeah, I think it's nice to think of those things. Tags, right? Oh, it's difficult, it's even more difficult, or it's hazardous. Cool. I'll say slow. And then we just keep going through. We've got, what we were looking for was more about mountains, slopes, and undergrowth. A bike just going by, a motorcycle. Loud. Plains, we have hedges and undergrowth, swamps, bogs and undergrowth, urban, crowds, doors, floors, gates, guards, portcullises, rooftops, and sewers. They give us a nice handy, there's a sidebar all about doors, gates, and walls, which gives us some tables with difficulty classes for doors, walls, and portcullises. I'm even giving you how you can, if you want to climb the portcullis, I'm not sure to what end, but if you wanted to climb it, you've got it. And also hardnesses for all those. I don't know if I would even bother with the hardness of an iron wall. Like, how are you getting through there? And then some stuff about basically your bend bars, lift gates, so I think about forcing open different environmental stuff. Then we're back to sewers, talking about sewer gas, also stairs, streets, and walls. This is all about urban environments, underground, floors, ledges, rubble, stalagmites and stalactites, and walls. Hey, if you just want if you ever wanted to, if you're sitting there and you're wondering, is it a stalactite or a stalagmite when I'm trying to describe? Stalactite with the C for ceiling, hanging down from the ceiling. G for ground from the floor. Good way to look at it. Stalactite that's got a C in it from the ceiling. Stalagmite got the G in it coming out of the ground. I don't know if that helps. There you go. Climate, fog, precipitation, visibility, fatigue, thunderstorms, and also temperature, wind, moving in the wind like Marcel Marceau. We get a nice table of temperature effects going from incredibly cold to incredibly hot, temperature ranges, how fatiguing it is, and then damage if there is any. Oh, Brian Smith says their trick was learn that tight holds tight to the ceiling. Interesting. But I think the C and G, if you can remember ceiling and ground, I think that one's even simpler. Because I don't know that I would think of it holds tight. I guess holds tight to the ceiling so it doesn't fall. I guess that works. Whichever one works. But then what's the other one? If you're looking at a stalagmite, what is it? It might be on the ground. It might not hold on to the ceiling. Natural disasters, avalanches, you could be buried, blizzards, collapses, earthquakes. There you could have a fissure, soul liquefaction. That would be an interesting thing, kind of a tomb of annihilation type effect. But this is soil liquefaction, tremors. You can have floods, sandstorms, tornadoes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, sub to volcanic eruptions, ash, lava bombs, lava flows, pyroclastic flows, and vents. You might have a wildfire featuring flames and heat and smoke. All right. Ian says stalagmite, stalactite, TTT. Oh, I don't know. We can let's have a whole stream on stalactites versus stalagmites, how to tell them apart. That sounds like it should have been a Monty Python sketch. How to tell a stalagmite from a stalactite from a long ways away. They look like the M or the T. M. I'll give you the T ones because the top of the T looks like the ceiling with the point of the T hanging down. But I don't know if the M's, if they look like the M's. I almost feel like if the M's were W's, it would look more like what I think to me. Or there's just two stalagmites on the corners. That's not too bad. I still like my G and C because you don't need to write it. You don't need to look at the letters. Just the sounds. G and K. Yeah, I followed you, Ian. I followed you, Ian, on the M looks like two stalagmites. I got you. And Brian says, I feel like we're very over-prepared for this very niche stone formation identification school. Someone's going to get helped by this. Someone. Somewhere. All right. How far am I from that? Am I going to have to do part 5? I'm close. I'm close. All right. So the last part we're getting here, hazards. Detecting a hazard. Every hazard is a trigger of some kind that sets its dangers in motion. For traps could be a mechanism, while for an environmental hazard or haunt, trigger may simply be proximity. When characters approach, they have a chance of finding the trigger area or mechanism before triggering the hazard. They automatically receive a check to detect hazards unless the hazard requires a minimum proficiency rank to do so. Okay, and then you just, I'm not going to go through more detail on that, but there's a little bit more about during exploration or whether it's a magical hazard. When you're triggering a hazard, if you fail to detect it, hazards have a reaction that occurs when they're triggered. So it runs almost like a creature in combat. You trigger it, it gets a reaction. Some complex hazards, may have pre-programmed actions called a routine, which probably has a number of things that are going to happen one after another. Some hazards can be reset. It might be like a pit trap, hidden pit trap, where the lid's going to, the floor opening is going to, I don't know, some kind of mechanism is going to close it again. We have a section disabling a hazard. The most versatile method for deactivating traps is the disable a device action of the thievery skill. So it's built into your skills, but I'm sure you can figure out other ways to do it. You also might want to damage a hazard. You could do something, break the door, bend, or just bust out, say the trap door or something, or something else, or if there's a trigger that leads to something, you could maybe disable the trigger in some way so that's not going to fire. You can attack a hazard, you can repair a hazard, or you could try counteracting a medical hazard. You could try to counteract the medical hazard as well, or you could try counteracting a magical hazard. And then they have an handy dandy experience table for the level of the hazard, whether it's simple or complex, and how much XP you get. And then they give us a bunch of hazards Here they have a table with their levels and then the page numbers. Again, this is really handy. I will read one of these, which will be yellow mold, because I like yellow mold. Are they not? Hold on a minute. What order are these in? Oh, they're by simple to complex. Yellow mold is simple. Okay, so we have simple and complex. Should I read a complex one? Maybe I'll read a simple one and a complex one. So simple. Where's the yellow mold? Here it is. Level 8 hazard. It's has a difficulty class of 28, trained stealth. The description is poisonous mold spores that assault nearby creatures. To disable it, it's a survival. So the stealth is kind of right. It has it acting as if it has a 28, kind of 28 in stealth. Meaning, if you remember yellow mold, it's kind of sitting there, basically inert on a surface. At least classically, you might touch it and it would just poof. All of a sudden, you'd find yourself in a cloud of yellow mold. Very easy to overlook. Hence, it's depending on the light levels and everything, you could very easily not notice the yellow mold. To disable it, it's you use survival. It's a difficulty class 26. To remove the mold without triggering the spores. Some way to put a cover over it, gently blow them away, because it's not really, it's just sitting on top of stuff. It's not hard sticking, so you could probably find a way to get rid of it. However fictionally you would do that, basically you would use in the absence of something in the fiction, you would use survival. It's got fortitude save, reflex save, and an armor class. It has hit points attached to it. It's immune to critical hits, and it has object immunities and precision damage, or is immune like an object, and it immune to precision damage. I mean, it's just a bunch of spores. You can't stab it in its vitals. It is what it is. The trigger is, or the spore explosion is the trigger, they're calling it spore explosion. As a creature moves into the mold space or damages the mold. So, like I said before, you might touch a surface that has mold on it. Poof. The effect is the triggering creature and all creatures within 10 feet are exposed to yellow mold spores. The yellow mold spores, they're inhaled, they're poison. Any drain condition from the spores persists after the spore's duration ends. It has a saving throw, DC 26, fortitude, maximum duration 6 rounds. Stage 1, D8 poison damage and drained in 1 round. Stage 2, 2d8 poison damage and drained. And then stage 3, 3d8 poison damage and drained 3, or went from drain 1 to drain 2 to drain 3, all for 1 round. So it doesn't kill you outright like yellow mold used to do back in my day. But, it still doesn't seem very nice. And now, quickly, let's see, these are all complex hazards. Now, let's do Spinning Blade Pillar. 4th level hazard. It's complex, it's mechanical, it's also trap. It's plus 11 stealth to notice the control panel. The description is, you see a metal pole with 3 razor sharp spinning blades, or actually you don't see it, but anyway, description for GM's point of view is it's a metal pole with 3 razor sharp spinning blades. It's hidden in the floor, connected to trigger plates in up to 8 floor tiles, and a hidden control panel within 30 feet. It's a DC 21 thievery check to disable. You have to do it twice on the pillar, or a 19 thievery check once on the control panel to deactivate the whole trap. So basically you have to do 2 different things on the pillar to deactivate it, or if you find the control panel, you just have to do 1 thing to deactivate it. It's got 21 armor class, plus 10 fortitude saves, plus 12 reflex saves. Pillar has got a 12 hardness. It's got 48 hit points. What's BT 24? I don't know BT. Probably missed that or something, but we're just going to move on. Panel hardness is 5. The panel hit points have is 20. It's immune to critical hits. It has it's object immunities, and it's immune to precision damage. The trigger is a creature steps on one of the trapped floor tiles. This is the rising pillar trigger, and the effect is the trap pops up in a grid intersection and makes a spinning blade strike against one adjacent creature, if any, and then rolls initiative. Now, its routine, this is a complex trap, uses this first action to make a spinning blade strike against each adjacent creature. Its second action to move straight in a random direction. You roll a d4 to figure out which direction it rolls in. And then its third action to make a spinning blade attack against each adjacent creature. This trap doesn't take a multiple attack penalty. So it's because of the way it's set up with kind of the grids of the plates, it's able to kind of move in the spaces between the floor tiles. So it goes, does one attack around everyone there, and then it's going to zip somewhere else and go around over there. It only moves about 10 feet. Its spinning blade attack is plus 12 melee, and it does 2d10 plus 5 slashing damage. And then it resets and deactivates after 1 minute, which in combat rounds is kind of an eternity since that's about 10 rounds. But there you go. So we got one example of a simple hazard, one example of a complex hazard. There's a bunch more. And then that is the end of the GM advice. So in terms of the GM section, I think it's pretty good. I mean, I like a lot of it here. I was kind of thinking it would have more, it would have these kind of text blurbs, and then give some more details, but it doesn't. So you kind of have to go with just sort of the more basic stuff that's talking about, and then figure it out from there. I don't know if there's a GM's guide, because remember, this is the core rulebook, and so there's this, and then there's presumably other things. I'll have to look at the library. Do they have something that if you want to get more in depth, you'll get there? I think for starting GMs, this is pretty good. I think it does a good job of giving you the basics, letting you in on it. I think they could probably have gone a little bit further in terms of stuff for new GMs to kind of help pave the way for it, but I think it's a good background, good basis. There's plenty of tools here for just figuring out stuff on the fly, like your difficulty challenges and things like that, and I appreciate that. It seems like for the most part, the system all works in the same way. So if you notice kind of traps and how they're working, doesn't work vastly different to creatures. It's got similar kind of stats, similar just behaviors, uses similar terminology. So if you understand how creatures work, it's going to give you a pretty good chance that you're going to know how hazards work when you see them. It's got a reaction. It's got a trigger. Same thing, like almost like having a readied action and a trigger like a player character or an NPC might have. And you can work it from there. And I think it's got good guidance on things like the social aspects of game mastering. I might have liked a little bit more depth, but I mean, this book is huge. We're already in the fours. This chapter starts, at page 482? We're into the 500, so I also get that you can only fit so much in. And I've seen this book, I've seen this book in gaming stores. I mean, they're huge books. So while I think it's a great start, I kind of wish there was a little bit more, but it is nothing really wrong with what they put here, and it does give a great basis. But I also, look, it's only so much. I mean, I'm sure they were going, well, we want to put in more stuff here. What do we take out? And I think this approach in this book seems to be kind of everything in the kitchen sink in terms of content. I mean, just in general, there's a ton of content here in terms of the number of stuff. Maybe personally, I would have said just in terms of usability, I could probably do a little bit less stuff and a little bit more of the other things, but I can't argue with that. People love lots of stuff, and this just one core book gives you a ton of stuff. And then finally, on just in terms of Pathfinder 2nd Edition as a whole, I mean, I don't see anything particularly immediately wrong with it. Now, I know that folks, and I mentioned this, I think, in the stream yesterday, that I'll have to go through and read or rewatch some of the videos I read from folks who had more negative views of Pathfinder 2nd Edition after playing it, because obviously I haven't played it, I've just read it. It seems very well organized, very well put together. It might feel too constrained for some. It is pretty granular. It's not 3.x levels of granular, but it is more than 5th edition granular. So where that comes in from you on that rules light to rules heavy spectrum, it's going to vary. And I think like I said, I think it puts it in a weird spot, because I don't know how many people were looking for a game that was in between 3.x or Pathfinder and 5th edition. I know there's some out there, but oftentimes those people are looking for maybe more granularity in one thing and not necessarily across the board more granularity. It's good, but I can see why this people would have been pushing this as an alternative to 5th edition. I can see some of the things where it seems like they did try to address things that maybe were pain points, or maybe that 5th edition didn't do particularly well, that they're working that. And obviously with the whole 1D&D and D&D moving towards a new, not edition, quote unquote, that this could be resurfaced again. And I think there are some really interesting things to offer here. So I think it's definitely worth looking at. If you get on this Humble Bundle, you're going to get a ton of this content. I think I went for the whole shebang, which was $25 if you pay the kind of minimum for everything, which is a steal. So if you're all interested in this, take a look at the Humble Bundle. It's for a good cause. If you've watched this or listened to this after the Humble Bundle, wait for a sale or just pick up the core books. I didn't look up how much the core books run normally, but they do all have this stuff digitally. Just know that I don't know if it's on drive-through, but Paizo has their own. You'll have to go into Paizo system to download everything, how you feel about making an account in another spot to do another thing or not. But it's definitely seems like some interesting stuff. And I've definitely found some ideas. I think, I could take this and kind of apply it to my own thing. So I'll say definitely give it a look. And if you can find a deal on it for either the physical book and or the digital book, I think it's worth a read. I do think it has some stuff to offer. Whether it has enough to sway you off of 5th edition or off of some other system, I don't know. It's probably going to depend a lot, but I think it has some stuff to offer. Brian Smith says, it's just gigantic, like a reference book. You'd be happy to have in a drawer nearby, but not really something I want to be cracking open in play. Yeah, and I haven't looked at all the materials that came in the Humble Bundle, and I haven't gone on a Paizo's thing. This definitely would be a case where it's like, yeah, give me a GM screen, even if I don't want to use it as a physical screen, just something I can have compressed some of the stuff in like an FAQ, a small little booklet, folder, something, because yeah, there's a lot here, which I think is both good, but also could be seen as kind of too much. So, but it was a really fun read. Hope everyone enjoyed it. I'm sorry I ran really long today, but I wanted to get through it all, and I'm glad I did. That was Pathfinder 2nd edition. If you enjoyed this video and you hung in here this far, if you give a thumbs up, that would be awesome. And if you made it this far and you feel like subscribing, that would also be awesome. Otherwise, I will talk to you folks later. Game on, and have a great rest of your day, night, or whenever you watch or listen to this. Bye now.